welcome to my podcast. So this episode we're talking about something that was inspired by my last episode about the Thunderbolts, because the origin of the Thunderbolts was from a 1990s book, like a late 1990s book, that was penciled by Mark Bagley, who is now a famous penciler because he was the Ultimate Spider-Man penciler. But before that, he penciled Amazing Spider-Man, which is when I became a fan of him. He penciled the New Warriors, and he penciled the Thunderbolts. So the New Warriors were some of my favorites back in the early 1990s. A teen team in the vein of the Teen Titans, something of that nature. But they were mostly existing characters who were not sidekicks of other characters, but they were mostly existing characters. And then Dwayne Michael Taylor, the Night Thrasher, who was an edgy 90s style character who was basically Black Batman, Black Teen Batman. Same origins. Oh, I lost my parents. He was rich. He had martial arts training. He wore a body armor, which Batman did or did not, depending on the writer, up until maybe the turn of the century. And then they established, yes, Batman does wear body armor. But yeah, and he had a skateboard that had a blade in it. He had a bladed skateboard that he would use from time to time. But for the most part, he was just Black Batman. Dwayne Michael Taylor, the Night Thrasher. Other members, Nova, in his 1970s debut, because Nova is an older character. Nova the Human Rocket. He was kind of like, if Spider-Man was Green Lantern, Nova. Not the same power set, but the Nova Corps, who you might be familiar with from the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, actually has powers. And so Nova the Human Rocket was a human that was a member of the Nova Corps with the powers of the Nova Corps. Other members, Firestar. Firestar had also been around since the very early 80s or late 70s, I think early 80s, with the Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends cartoon. And then she was popular enough there that they transitioned her into the comic books. And she had microwave powers. Basically, she could fly and shoot fire was the visual representation for powers, but it wasn't flame she was creating. She had the ability to emit microwaves. I'm not sure how that helped her fly, but yeah, that was her shtick. Marvel Boy, I think is what he was called. Vance Astro, or Vance Astrovic, was a pre-existing character on two levels. So the first appearance of Vance Astrovic was actually in the original Guardians of the Galaxy, which is much different than the contemporary Guardians of the Galaxy. And he was kind of a Buck Rogers-ish character who got frozen in time as an astronaut and woke up in the 31st century, I believe. His regular Marvel Universe version, because that's an alternate universe, the Guardians of the Galaxy future is an alternate universe future. The regular 616 universe version of him is a mutant with telekinetic abilities. And so Vance Astrovic was one of or Marvel Boy, which I believe was his name in the book, but he is one of the core members of the original New Warriors. We had Namorita, which was the Submariner Namor, Prince Namor. It was his cousin, I believe, his little cousin. And she was a mutant in the way that Namor's a mutant. So she's stronger than regular Atlanteans, and she can fly for whatever reason, has those little wings on her feet. So she was the powerhouse, along with Nova. I think she and Nova, actually she was stronger than Nova at that point in time. Speedball controlled kinetic energy, and he started in a Steve Ditko book, also another Spider-Man analog for that era. Goofy teen, silly powers. The book did not become incredibly popular, but they still wanted to use the character, so Speedball became one of the original New Warriors. And he controlled kinetic energy, but he didn't have control of his powers in any kind of significant way. But you saw flashes of how powerful he could be, and it was very, very powerful. Speedball. And I believe those are the core members. So this story arc that I'm talking about, called Forever Yesterday, took place between issues 11 and 13, issues 11 through 13. And it's basically an homage, because lots of things were at the time, to the famous X-Men storyline, Days of the Future Past, which was a storyline from 1981, famous for an alternate future where the X-Men were hunted by Sentinels to the last man, and Wolverine dies very early on in the opening pages of that story. Same here. Wolverine dies very early on in the opening pages of this Forever Yesterday story. So why am I talking about this story? Well, Forever Yesterday was a nostalgic favorite of mine because it presents an alternate history. So the time it takes place in is contemporary, but it presents an alternate history in which Egypt never fell. There's an enemy of Nova from the 1970s who became an enemy of the Fantastic Four. Very powerful character who gets his power from this Egyptian relic called the Ka Stone, which gives him nearly cosmic energy and immortality. And that character was the main antagonist of this story, but not the Sphinx we remember. The story is a little bit problematic because basically a crazy, lovelorn, obsessed fan of the Sphinx from ancient Egypt basically created this alternate timeline where she ended up being the Sphinx after she and the Sphinx lived together for 3,000-4,000 years in their reign, taking over the world, and basically Egypt takes the place of Great Britain in spreading a central culture globally. Racism reigns because the three great powers of the world are basically the Egyptian-based powers. So the United States is the United States of Assyria, but Sphinx moved their seat of power to the United States of Assyria after the First World War, because for some reason that's still on the timeline. It doesn't make sense to me that there are 3,000 years of unbroken history, but the advancement culturally is the same, and events happen on the same timeline. Doesn't fully make sense to me, but that is the way that they happened in this storyline. And it's supposed to be like a dystopian storyline because there is racism, but it's basically just a flipped racism of the real world, or of the 616 world. So there's prejudice against mutants, and instead of black people being discriminated against, the pinks, the white folks, are the ones who are discriminated against. Yeah, that's it. That is the main difference. And there's probably more peace because of the power of the Sphinx. The Sphinx hasn't ruled the world this whole time. He's kind of stood in the background and kind of pushed forward history, as opposed to, like, consulting, as opposed to ruling up until after World War II, when the Sphinx decided to take power because of some horrible events that happened. And he's like, I'm so exhausted of my life, which is part of the main Sphinx 616 storyline. He's exhausted of his immortality and wants to die, but he can't because he's so powerful. In this storyline, it centers around Nova, because because it's a story that centers around a world that is ruled by not white people. You got to center around the white guy. So it centers around Nova, who is a member of the Avengers, which is the main draw. So the story opens, you find the mutant rebellion, and I'm not going to go through the whole story because I want you to go read this. So the story opens with the mutant rebellion trying to escape the Avengers. You kind of see the Avengers in shadow as they're hunting these people, and you can't quite tell what's going on. They look different, but you can't quite see they're different. And then by the second or third page, full reveal, they're all standing together, and you see what are the alternate timeline Avengers, which is... And these characters don't get developed at all because they're almost not important to the story except to muddy the water in combat, which was how the Avengers were used in these kinds of stories all through the 90s. They were just there to fight and just muddy the waters, basically. So you have Captain Assyria, who is a African Assyrian, basically. He's a black person, and he's basically Steve Rogers as presented. He's Black Steve Rogers. There's almost no different, because they don't delve into what he is or who he is. No difference personality-wise. He's just Black Steve Rogers. You have Black Iron Man, who is Tony. You can just call him Tony Stark. I don't think he's given a last name, but he's basically like a Middle Eastern Tony Stark. And he acts like he does in the 90s comic book. So there's no difference given there. Instead of Thor, you have Horus, who is the Egyptian Lord of Light. He is a warrior god here, as Thor is in his books. He's the one who actually blows away Wolverine with the power of his magic Ankh, which is presented like Thor's hammer, a weapon that Horus wields in his hand and shoots out sun-level light blasts, I guess. He disintegrates Wolverine except for the adamantium skeleton. That's the big shock where you're like, oh, wow. There is Scepter, who is the original Captain Marvel. Not the original, but that era's Captain Marvel, Monica Rambeau, a black woman from Louisiana. Who knows what her origins are here, but she's called Scepter. And Storm, who is a mutant, but they never talk about the fact, I don't think in this book, that she's a mutant helping hunt down the mutants in the Mutant Rebellion. These are the core Avengers, along with Nova, who is their new member. And instead of Alfred as the butler, you have... I'm sorry, not Alfred, because that's Batman's butler. Instead of Jarvis as the butler, the infamous Jarvis, Jamal. Jamal is Middle Eastern Jarvis. And that's all the character development he gets. But so you have these Egyptian characters. So they're black and Middle Eastern characters as the Avengers. And then their token white member, Nova, and they're shown to go off and have like a community with each other that doesn't include Nova. And Nova's like, well, they treat me like an equal, but they also don't treat me as a friend. He's like, I can't complain because my position on the Avengers has helped my family. So he goes back to his family, and his family is living a really good life for white folks because of his connection to the Avengers. They're elevated on the social ladder, but they know something's wrong. And then they introduce this character who is the spirit of truth, like a cosmic entity, the spirit of truth, Sage. It's not a big enough event for this kind of thing to take place, but that's like lazy writing, but it is period specific that they would do something like that. Just the cosmic spirit of truth, Sage, says, hey, you know the reality's not right because white people should be in charge. It's not spoken, but kind of the feeling you get there. And the thing is that the alternate history itself is the most interesting part to me. It's the setting. It's the world that it lives in. Like the Marvel movie, Black Panther, the original Black Panther, is a fine movie. Some people love it. I think it's the greatest thing since sliced bread. I like it. I think it's really good. But the thing that drives me for that movie, the thing that makes me swoon, is Wakanda itself. It's the setting. Kind of wish the whole movie had taken place in Wakanda, because the first time you fly into Wakanda, it is a revelation because you'd never seen anything like that on screen. Same for this alternate black world in a major publisher's universe. In Marvel Comics of the 90s, you get this African world. You get this world that is influenced by Africa as opposed to being influenced by Europe. And that idea is a revelation, but they don't do anything with it because they don't have time to. There's only 3 books, and it's just super interesting to me that the setting exists. It's really fueled my imagination at the time, but it was never shown in print again. Yes, so they live in this world where Sphinx is an autocrat who's ruled for 3,000 years. There are gross inequities, but it's mirroring the real world, except, black for white. And the thing that I started to mention earlier, but didn't I? The world is racially divided into 3 categories. There's an Asian Pacific Union. There's like a European Union. And then there is basically the Egyptian world, which is the rest of the world. And so the world wars represent the wars of these various factions divided by race, which is interesting to me too, because race in itself is a fairly recent European invention. Like you could be divided by nationality or language before that. This world could be so much more than it is. Like I said, 3 issues. It's not tying into any other books. It's not a maxi series. There's only so much time to work. In fact, you can see on the page that there's only so much time to work with it because Mark Bagley's art, while beautiful, the finishes on that, so the inks and the colors are kind of incomplete for some of the panels, which was not uncommon for that era of comic book making. It was the height of comic book sales. And so these people on the various staffs, they were stretched thin. I'm sure that crunch was a constant thing, but like you see, like in small panels where they don't have to put all the details in, you'll see that the inkers will color every person on that page the same color. Like they'll all be green or whatever, like full body green, or to represent Shadow's full body blue or whatever. You'll see that the finishes, the inks on those given panels won't be as detailed as on some of the other panels. So I feel like they kind of pushed through this book because there's a lot of detail on the page too, because it's a book that features a lot of characters and they don't have time to explore the world. One of the things that's interesting is that Reed Richards exists in this universe. He's part of the story, but he's like a low-level technician at the corporation that Dwayne Michael Taylor's father owns. But there's a Fantastic Four in this story who aren't actually part of the story. They're just presented in a picture of like what this alternate universe kind of looks like. And they're black. So what's their story? Who knows? But I'm curious to find out what is going on there, and I never will. That is intriguing to me. But there's not time to develop that because the through line of the narrative is very direct. There's maybe 2 or 3 things going on. There's a mutant rebellion that is trying to break into the Sphinx's stronghold. This woman who is the current Sphinx, who has the power of the Castone, who rules the world and is oppressing the mutants for some reason. They're trying to break into her island of, it's Manhattan, but it's called like Monacoman or something that's supposed to sound regional. There's a force field around that island because during World War II, the Japanese dropped nuclear weapons on basically the Northeast and destroyed the whole Northeast. So after that, they decided to protect that area because that's where the Sphinx lived at the time, and he protected it with his power. killed so many people it made him depressed, and that's why he killed himself and passed his power on to this woman who was his wife, because that was a history that she concocted through that power of making the Sphinx the ruler for 3,000 years and her his eternal wife. And he passed along immortality to their cat as a sign of his love for her. The ultimate and like crazy fangirlism is what is created in this story. But so the mutants are trying to break into the force fields that surround Manhattan. Reed Richards is the tech operator one of the tech operators that help maintain the integrity of the force fields. He's going to let them in because he's an oppressed class. Dwayne Michael Taylor's father finds out that Reed is doing this and helps him allow the mutants to come into the island to get through the force field. What can I do to help? To establishing him as a good person. Because he does this, the security forces under the Sphinx break in and murder his whole family and Reed's whole family, because they're trying to hide with Dwayne's family as they decide what their next moves are going to be after they let the mutants in. Dwayne escapes. He's going to have his revenge. He's going to go after the Sphinx. He's just a regular kid at this point. He's not like a super soldier, martial artist, body armor guy. So he becomes part of the story. I'm going through the story, and I meant not to do that. So I'm not going to say anything else about what the actual story is. I'll only say that the way it sketches this world, but then the world doesn't come fully together, it's a cock tease of a comic book story, and that makes me sad, but I'm glad it exists in the period of time that it does. Early 90s, there's a black cultural renaissance, so everybody wants a little piece of that. That's why somebody like Dwayne Michael Taylor exists in the first place. So he gets to be part of the story, not as a main character, but he contributes to the overall arc. Marvel Boy and Firestar also part, I think her name is Angela, but they're also part of the story as part of the Mutant Rebellion. Namorita is also part of the story. I guess he's known as Namor now because of that movie. So Namorita is part of the rebellion because Magneto and Emma Frost try to re-establish old contacts. Evidently, the Atlanteans helped in World War II, so they go to Atlantis to try to curry favor to have them help in their rebellion now. And so that's how Namorita gets to appear, the Submariner S. She just goes by her name. She doesn't have a code name. But that's how she appears in the book. And I think she only appears for like a second. They talk about what the Atlanteans do when the rebellion goes down, but they don't get to be seen again. So Namorita and Speedball are actually, and he appears in the story too in a throwaway gag, but he's not part of the story either. But those core characters get to be a part of the story. Fine, not even my favorite New Warrior story, just one that stokes interest in me because of the Afrocentric setting. And I don't think that they've ever done anything like that in a book again. Whatever the next Black Renaissance was, just focused on characters or just used Wakanda in the main 616 for better effect. The Black Panther books probably did more for Afrofuturism than this story did, but this is one that sticks in my head. So that's just why I wanted to talk about it. The New Warriors actually has some, if you ever want to go back and read back issues of something that's interesting from that period of time, it's strong. Like the first 20 issues, very strong. There's a nice conspiracy that comes to fruition. My favorite story arc there is actually the New Warriors and the Fantastic Four fighting Terrax the Tamer, one of Galactus's heralds. That's a great book. I think that's the following storyline, actually. I think that's like 16 and 17, maybe. Yeah, go back and read the New Warriors. I just wanted to talk about that because that is a storyline from the early 90s that sticks in my imagination. If you'd like to come back and hear me ramble about another old comic book storyline, because I've got a few that are among my favorites, let me know. My intention is to make these storylines interesting to you without revealing what's going on fully or like telling you what the narrative is or the plot, so that you'll actually want to go and read them. So we may try this again. We'll see. But as always, if you'd like to find me and have a conversation about the New Warriors, you can find me on all the things. Blue Sky, Threads, Instagram as Johnathanblade. I don't have a separate feed for the Elder Blerd, Johnathanblade, the Elder Blerd podcast. That's just part of the Johnathanblade brand. So Johnathanblade on all the things. And that's it. Hopefully we'll catch you in the next one. Thanks for listening.